good evening, everyone. Today is Earth Day, 22nd of April, and I can't think of no more fitting moment, around a question that sits at the very heart of what this day really asks us to confront. Over the past 2 months, since February, March, and early in the April, we started this Glacier Dialogue series that has taken us on this journey, across many dimensions of the cryosphere crisis or glacier crisis. In our first dialogue, we sat with the science, listening to what the ice itself is telling us. In our second dialogue, we faced the growing threat of GLOFs, glacier lake outburst floods, and extreme glacial events. And our third dialogue brought us to resilience, to how mountain communities are holding on, adapting, and pushing back under extraordinary pressure. In our fourth dialogue, we explored the power of storytelling and visual narrative, how glaciers can be made visible, can be felt, and carried into human imagination, into public consciousness. And throughout, we have listened to the lived realities of those who live closest to these landscapes, whose daily lives are shaped by snow, melt, and seasonal rhythms that are now shifting beneath their feet. Each of those conversations has deepened one essential truth that glaciers are not remote. They are not only a climate indicator on a scientist's or a glaciologist's graph, they are a source of life, a calendar, a memory, and today, increasingly, a reason to live. In our fifth dialogue today, we turn to what may be the most human and urgent question of all. What happens when glaciers retreat and people are forced to move? Climate change is not only altering landscapes, it is altering life worlds. When water sources become unreliable, when seasons shift unpredictably, when agriculture weakens, when hazards, disasters intensify, movement often follows. And sometimes it's sudden, sometimes it's slow, and sometimes it's visible, and sometimes silently. A quiet departure of a young person who sees no future at home. Families relocate, communities fragment, culture memories thin, identity becomes unsettled. So, climate migration is not just about leaving a place, it is about what is lost when a place can no longer hold you. And this is why our theme today includes not only migration, but dignity. Because the real question is not simply whether people move, but how they move, under what conditions, with what choices, and with what justice. Who bears that cost? Whose voices are heard in policy rooms? Who adapts first and who is left behind? How do nations cooperate when rivers cross borders but policies do not? At the Voice of Glaciers Foundation, we believe the glaciers speak not only through meltwater and risk, but through human stories, through displacement, through resilience, memory, and hope. And that is what we are here exactly to explore today. With that, we are honored to be joined by two extraordinary voices today. Our first speaker brings us the academic and diplomatic lens, the macro framework that helps us understand what is happening at the scale of river systems, institutions, and nations. Dr. Anamika Barua is a professor of ecological economics at IIT Guwahati and one of the leading voices in transboundary water governance, socio-hydrology, and climate change vulnerability. With a particular focus on the Brahmaputra basin, her work asks a question that challenges the very foundation of traditional water science. What happens when you put people, power, and politics back into the river? She will help us understand water not only as a physical flow, but as a social, political, and deeply gendered reality. Dr. Anamika, welcome. The floor is yours. You will have 20 to 25 minutes to share your remarks, and then we'll move to Nidhi afterwards. Uh, but welcoming you both, Nidhi, thank you for joining, and thank you, Dr. Anamika. So please, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anurag, and thank you for also setting the context of the dialogue that we planned today. And I think you very nicely also you have set the context of what I am trying to present through my talk today. And also it's a pleasure to share the platform with Nidhi. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And so as you see on the screen, that's the Brahmaputra River, which is just flowing opposite to where I'm sitting right now in IIT Guwahati. So let me actually begin with a simple question that when we talk about water, what exactly are we referring to? Is it just a physical resource like flows, glaciers, rivers, or is it something much more complex? I think that's something very, very important to always ask. Is it just a resource or something much more than a resource? So today in my talk, I invite you to actually rethink water systems, not as purely hydrological systems, but as Anurag also mentioned, but as deeply social, political, and a dynamic system, which is shaped by not just only hydrology, but also by human decisions, institutions, and power relations. So in this presentation, I will draw on socio-hydrological perspective, which I'm going to explain what does it mean, using the Brahmaputra Basin as a lens to show that water is not just about availability, it is also about who controls it, who benefits, who bears the risk, and also, as Anurag mentioned, how societies respond to these uncertainty. And as we move through this talk, I hope to, challenge a conventional assumption that better data and better models alone can solve water problem. I mean, of course, sitting in IIT, that is what we mostly do. But instead, I will argue that understanding water today requires us to look at intersections between nature and society, especially in the context, when you are talking about transboundary rivers such as the Brahmaputra, because there are then transboundary dynamics, climate uncertainty, and also deep inequalities, which we cannot really see when we just look at the river as a resource. So the key question today that I plan to explore with you is, like, can we truly understand water system without understanding the societies that shape them? So let me now step back and look at the bigger picture. So today, water systems across the world are under increasing stress, and this stress is not just coming from a single source. It is the result of multiple interconnected pressures. First, we are witnessing the growing impacts of climate change, particularly in glacier-filled systems like the Brahmaputra. Changes in temperatures are accelerating glacier melt, something I'm sure was discussed in the earlier dialogue. We're talking about altering river patterns, increasing uncertainty. What was actually, once predictable, like the seasonal flows, monsoon patterns, it is now becoming far more variable and difficult to anticipate. Then at the same time, there is a sharp rise in water demand. Agriculture, of course, continues to be the largest consumer of water, but rapidly expanding cities are adding new pressures, urbanization, industrialization, and also changing consumption patterns, which is very closely also connected to the pattern of urbanization, are intensifying competition over already, stressed water resources. Now, this naturally leads to the third dimension, which is rising conflicts. These conflicts are not just between countries sharing rivers, but also within countries, across states, sectors, and communities. So we, see tensions between upstream and downstream users within the same country, within the same state, and at times within the same village, within the same district also, between rural and urban demands, and also between development and ecological, sustainability. So, and this is the key message that this slide actually wants to bring out, that water challenges today are becoming increasingly complex. So they are no longer just technical or hydrological problems that can be solved with better data or better engineering alone. Instead, they are deeply intertwined with, social, political, and economic processes. So as we move forward, in this presentation, I would actually like you to keep this in mind, that understanding water today requires us to actually move beyond a very narrow sectoral view. And instead, we need to really engage with the complex, interconnected nature of water systems, which probably one discipline cannot do. That's the most important thing to remember. Okay, so because I'm talking about that, that conventional way of looking at water systems, I want to argue that that probably is not enough. So let me now turn to to this important limitation in how we traditionally study water systems, particularly through the lens of, glacier science. So first thing is that there is no doubt that traditional glacier science has made significant contribution. It helps us understand today glacier melt dynamics, provides river flow precipitation projections, and also it captures a lot of seasonal variability in water availability. And these are, essential insights, especially for glacier-fed river systems like the Brahmaputra, where upstream changes can have far-reaching downstream impacts. However, the question that we must ask is this enough to understand the real world water challenges? Because when we move from models to reality, we actually begin to see a gap. So the traditional approaches often do not tell us who controls water or how decisions about water allocations are made. The another very important question is, who benefits and who loses when water becomes scarce or when infrastructure is built. And, importantly, they do not capture how people and institutions respond to these changing water conditions, because it's important to remember that people do respond. Within, even if they have limited capacity, they do respond. Either they cope or they adapt. There could be conflict, there could be cooperation, there could be various policy interventions. So in other words, when we are quite good at understanding the physical behavior of water, we are far less equipped at times you will see that to understand the social behavior around water. And this brings us to the central message of this slide, that physical science does not automatically translate into real world outcomes. And so it's very important to remember that it is, or I would say it's crucial to move beyond a purely physical understanding, and it's important to incorporate the human dimension in our systems, because ultimately water problems are not just about flows and volumes, but it's about people, power, and decision making. Now, having discussed the limitations of the purely physical approach, let me now introduce you to the concept of sociohydrology. So, at its core, sociohydrology is the study of these two-way interactions between water and society. This is important because, as I've mentioned, that water does not just shape societies. Societies also actively shape water systems. So there is therefore a two-way connect. But traditionally, we have often treated, water as an external physical system, something that flows independently of human action. But in reality, human decisions, behaviors, and also institutions continuously influence how water is used, distributed, and managed. For example, when we decide to have a water infrastructure, which is a human decision, but that, of course, had a huge impact on that physical system. So sociohydrology, therefore, shifts the focus from a one-dimensional view to a dynamic interactive system. And there are three key areas that sociohydrology pay attention to. The first is human behavior. How do individuals, communities, and government respond to water scarcity, floods, or uncertainty? Do they adapt, over-extract, Do they conserve or do they compete? So these are behavioral responses, which is central to understanding water outcomes. The second is institutions. This includes formal policies, laws, and agreement, as well as, and very important to remember, includes informal norms and practices. So institutions determine who has access to water, how is it allocated formally or even informally, and how conflicts are managed. And the third and very important one is the feedback loops. And this is very crucial because human actions taken to solve a problem can often, reshape the system itself. And sometimes, and most of the time, it could be very unintended that it happened in that way. But for example, building embankments to control floods may reduce, flood risk in the short run. But it increases vulnerability in the long run. It might create a new kind of conflict in the long run. So these feedbacks are what make water systems dynamic and often unpredictable. And this brings us to the central idea, and which is what is captured in the slide, is that water systems are not just natural systems, they're a combination of nature and society. Now that we understand what socio-hydrology is, the next question is, what does it actually reveal that traditional approaches do not? Why it is different than the traditional approaches. The first important insight that socio-hydrology brings is that water scarcity is often not just a physical problem. It is a governance failure in many cases. In many regions, water may be available in aggregate, but access is uneven due to poor management, weak institutions, or even because of unequal power structures. So scarcity is not only about not enough water, but also about who has access and who does not. The second thing that socio-hydrology shows us is that impacts of floods are not determined by nature alone. They are strongly shaped by infrastructure and policy decisions. For example, as I mentioned, embankments, dams, urban planning choices can either reduce risk or in some cases actually increase vulnerability over time. So it actually act over and above the natural system. So a flood is never just a natural event. And I think that's something which we are seeing a lot across the country, that it is more seems to be a social, political, or an economic decision, and because of which an intervention happened, which has led to a flood. So third and very important is adaptation, and adaptation is unequal. Different groups within the same region have very different capacities to respond to water-related risks. Wealthier or more powerful groups can adapt more easily, while marginalized communities, especially women, small farmers, informal settlers, bear a disproportionate share of the burden. And this leads us to the point that the same river can actually produce very different outcomes to communities. Today, I think Nidhi is going to discuss about this in more detail, is that two communities living along the same river experiencing same hydrological condition can have completely different experiences. One may benefit while other may suffer. The difference lies here this difference is not because of the river itself, but because of the social structure, the governance structure, and all the institutions governing it. So what socio-hydrology ultimately reveals is that water outcomes are not, again, in this case, as you saw, is determined by nature or only by hydrology, but they are also, shaped by human choices, systems of governance, and also the kind of power relations that exist around this hydrological system. Now, let me explain why I focus specifically, given this background, on the Brahmaputra River Basin. The Brahmaputra is not just any river. It represents a uniquely complex and a challenging system. It actually, Brahmaputra becomes an ideal case for understanding socio-hydrological dynamics. Why? Because to begin with, it is a glacier-fed river originating in the Himalayas. This means its flows is closely linked to glacier dynamics and snow melt, making it also highly sensitive to changes in temperature and climate. Second, the basin is highly climate sensitive because even a small change in climate pattern, whether it can lead to glacier retreat, changing monsoon intensity, extreme weather events. So all of these can have significant impact on water availability and also flood risks across the region. Third and very important, which I'm going to talk in more detail in my next slide, but is that to remember that Brahmaputra again is a transboundary river system shared across multiple countries, that is China, India, Bhutan, Bangladesh. So, why is this important? Because it introduces another layer of geopolitical complexity where water is not just a resource, but also a matter of sovereignty, power, and, strategic interest. And finally, the basin is characterized by extreme floods and high vulnerability. Particularly regions like, in Assam and Bangladesh experience recurrent flooding, which affects livelihoods, infrastructure, ecosystem. But as we discussed earlier, these impacts are not just because of the natural event, but many a times they are shaped by, governance mechanism, what somebody did upstream, the impact of any infrastructure, social inequalities, etc. So that is why Brahmaputra can be actually understood as a high-risk socio-hydrological system. It is a space, where uncertainty, conflict, inequality intersect, making it a powerful lens through which to rethink how we understand and, govern water systems. Okay, let me now turn to one of the most critical aspects of Brahmaputra Basin, and something which Anurag mentioned is also very close to my heart, is that the transboundary complexity. So rivers like Brahmaputra do not respect, unfortunately, political boundaries. They flow naturally across countries, but governance systems remain confined within national borders. This creates actually the most important fundamental tension. So the first issue is about the classic upstream downstream dynamic. Countries located upstream, particularly say China in the case of Brahmaputra, have a strategic advantage, and they are able to influence the timing, quantity, and even quality of the water flows if it wants to, before it reaches downstream countries like India and Bangladesh. The second point is about very important, is data asymmetry. That's the second issue. Reliable hydrological data, especially from upstream region, is often limited and selectively, shared. And this kind of data is important for downstream countries, because if it is not provided at the right time in the right format, then it can create uncertainty, particularly in managing floods or planning for water availability during particularly in season. So in a river system which is, like a kind of a system like Brahmaputra, which is highly climate sensitive, if there is a lack of transparent data sharing, that can also lead to a serious governance challenge. Third, and very important dimension, something which we are talking a lot in the last few years, is dams and infrastructure, which is where the issue becomes even more complex. So China has been investing in hydropower projects on the upper reaches of the Brahmaputra, which they call as Yalong Sangpo. While these are officially presented as run-of-the-river projects, they still raise concerns downstream regarding potential alterations in flow, sediment transport, and also, of course, ecological impacts. So the point is that dams are not just technical structures, right? They are also political instruments. They can influence bargaining power, they can create dependencies, they can shape regional dynamics. So it's very important that it can also reshape the geopolitics. So water in such basins therefore becomes intertwined with this broader political relation, when there are trust deficits, strategic considerations. All of these actually makes cooperation limited, at the same time also creates a lot of governance challenge. So, while water flows across borders, unfortunately, governance does not. So the river is physically connected, but institutions that is managing the river are so fragmented. And this disconnect creates uncertainty, potential conflict, and also unequal outcomes across the basin. So when we look at Brahmaputra through socio-hydrological lens, we are not just studying the river, we are actually studying a system that is shaped by, of course, hydrology. But along with hydrology, we also need to understand power, politics, infrastructure, asymmetries. All of these are intersecting across borders. Okay, so at this point, it is also important to recognize that, while I have been talking that water is not a physical resource alone, then what it is apart from that? When I say water is political, what does it mean? It basically means that there is something like a power and there is something like control. Who decides how water is allocated, how water has, who has access to water, whose interests are prioritized. Very important when we make any decision about water to keep these in mind. Second, water is social as well, because some, access to water often, if it's unequal, it is most of the time shaped by class, location, also economic condition. And third, that water is gender. In many contexts, especially in developing regions, women actually bear a disproportionate burden, collecting water, managing household needs, and also coping with water stress. So the key question here is that water reflects actually the structure of the society. And it mirrors existing inequalities, power relations, social hierarchies, rather than being a very neutral or purely technical or purely natural resource. So, but let me just quickly highlight the gender and inequality in water systems. In many contexts, many of our field work very clearly shows, and many times people ask, how would a transboundary water decision be gendered? But it is very much, because when there are certain decisions that are made that reduces the access to water, women who are the primary managers of water at the household level are the ones who are highly exposed. They often face more exposure also to climate risk, whether during floods, droughts, or water scarcity, because their responsibilities are directly tied to water availability. So if there is limited data sharing, limited cooperation, limited information sharing, it actually falls directly on the women as well, although one cannot see it, because when we say transboundary water, it's up there. So what is gender has to do with transboundary water, right? So unfortunately, those who are least responsible are often the most affected. So understanding these inequalities are extremely important, because water challenges are not experienced equally across society. Now, let me turn to the role of institutions and behavior in shaping water outcomes. So when we talk about water governance, we often talk about policies and treaties, formal rules that define how water is allocated, managed, and shared. So in transboundary basins like Brahmaputra, these agreements are very, very important, but they are often limited or incomplete. I mean, if you have questions, I can speak more about it, why I say so, but they are, of course, very, very ad hoc and very limited. At the same time, we therefore need to recognize the role of informal practices, something, again, I'm sure Nidhi is going to speak more on this, local norms, customary arrangements, everyday decision-making processes, because when you don't have formal policies, formal treaties in place, they are very important. And most importantly, there is also something like community level adaptation. People are not passive recipient of water stress. And that's something which I keep telling in my institutions as well, that don't think that we are Masiha and we go and give our solutions to people. People already know, they are already responding to these stresses. So what is important is that it is important for us to understand that water system in a way that we need to also understand how society organize themselves, how how do they govern these crises, and how do they also respond whenever there is any kind of challenge related to water. Now, very quickly, before I have two more slides, just very quickly, that there's something that I mentioned in the beginning, that's the feedback loop. So when you say a feedback loop simply means that our actions today can change the system in ways that affects the future outcomes. So for example, take the example that when flood occurs, a common response is to build embankments to control water. Of course, in the short run, this has reduced immediate risk, but over time, these embankments can actually alter the natural river dynamics. It can increase sedimentation, it can raise riverbeds, ultimately actually leading to a higher long-term flood risk. So what begins as a solution can sometimes create a new problem. And this is why we say interventions can sometimes worsen the problem that they are trying to solve. And so this brings us to the key idea that human actions actively reshape system. So that's the feedback loop that I'm talking about. Now, it doesn't mean that, it's not that I'm saying that we shouldn't do anything, but whatever we are doing, we need to keep in mind that water systems are not static. They evolve continuously in response to both natural processes and human decisions. And therefore, understanding this feedback is very crucial, because without it, even a well-intentioned policies can lead to unintended and often adverse consequences. Now, so while, before I end, what I want to also bring in here is that today's risks do not actually arise from a single source. Instead, they emerge at the intersection of three powerful forces: climate uncertainty, which I already explained to you, transboundary conflict, and also inequality. What makes this particularly important is that these factors interact with each other. So risks are not isolated events anymore. They are also systemic events. A climate shock can trigger conflict. Conflict can, worsen inequality, and inequality can deepen vulnerability to climate risk. So it's like a circular kind of a flow. And this is why understanding water systems today requires a holistic and a socio-hydrological perspective. So let me end by drawing together the key takeaways from this discussion. First, water systems are not purely natural. They are socio-ecological systems shaped much by human decisions as by physical processes. Second, while glacier science gives us critical insights into water availability, it is not sufficient on its own. To understand real-world outcomes, we must go beyond hydrology. Third, power, governance, and behavior play a central role. Who controls water, how institutions function, and how communities respond ultimately determine outcomes on the ground. And this brings us to a crucial need: equity and cooperation. Without fair access and transboundary collaboration, risk will only deepen, especially in shared river basins like the Brahmaputra. And finally, the central message of this presentation is understanding rivers requires understanding societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anamika. I mean, wow. Now I know what Dr. Ashim meant when he told me that you should totally have Dr. Anamika on one of the Glacier dialogues when he made this introduction. And now I understood like the whole his perspective of you know uh, when he recommended your name. Thank you for walking us through this beautiful like presentation, sharing a larger perspective of water governance, the vulnerability, the power game, like variety of how the stress these water resources are, the complex conflict dynamic that arises, and just overall socio hydrology, system, looking river more than just as a physical lesson, but from different lenses. Thank you so much. We have understood like the macro architecture of this, uh, but now I think it's time we also look at from the human face. What is the human face to this? And with for that, so lucky to have Nidhi, who I got to meet last week in Bombay. Nidhi needs, like no introduction, honestly. She's one of the India's most respected independent journalists with over 2 decades of experience reporting on, environment, climate, rural, like really going out in villages in the field, and then on the gender side of the work. And then her work has consistently centered the community voices that are generally absent from the rooms where decisions are made, whether it is rural women, whether it is indigenous communities or frontline farmers. She has spoken of feminizing climate solutions, not just as a slogan but as a practice of recognizing the immense economic ecological knowledge that women, that mountain people and the rural communities carry. So Nidhi, it's such a pleasure to have you here joining today. Thank you. I will let you share all the human stories of your work with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anurag. I will just quickly try and share my screen. Sorry, here is my presentation. Just a sec. Sorry, I'm just sharing. Okay. Visible?
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah, great. So thank you so much. And without losing any time, because I want to have some time for discussion at the end. I think, Anurag, what you said in the beginning about speaking about glaciers and glaciers not just being the science part of it. It's also the society, which again, Anamika pointed out the same thing, that if you have to understand glaciers or rivers, you have to look at the society. So what I've tried to do is, because I'm a journalist and I document stories, so mine is not at all science bit. Mine is just stories that I've picked up while traveling through the Himalayan region. And I've actually purposely picked up Khumbu region of Nepal, which is the Everest region. The reason being, 2 years back in May 2024, as part of a media boot camp, we were like a group of 8 journalists from some countries. We all went to the Everest base camp. And the whole idea was to basically understand what's happening in the roof of the world, what climate change is doing there. And if climate change can make changes at that elevation, one can just imagine what's actually happening. So these stories I've picked up from the Khumbu region, and I'll also link it to the other Himalayan region also. So this is something, we all know May 29, 1953. I mean, our world changed completely, because that's the day when finally, Hillary and Tenzing summited Everest, and they were on the highest point in the world. On the right-hand side, I have an image of an old person whom I met while we were on our way to the Everest base camp. This was on May 4th, 2024. And a lot of my the presentation is actually through the eyes of this person who lives in Everest region. And he's also a very important person, because he was the last living memory of that expedition of Hillary and Tenzing. He was the last, because at that time in 1953, they had some high altitude porters who were hired, and Sherpa Tenzing, Kanchan Sherpa ji was one of the high altitude porters. And when we met him in 2024, he was 92 years old. Amazing memory. He recalled almost everything. Sherpa ji passed away last year on October 16, 2025. And I feel we were very fortunate that we actually met him. And he's actually seen the entire region change. And we all know that region is like famous for glaciers also. So he was 20 years old in 1953 when the summit happened for the first time. And a lot of things he told us about Sherpa culture, because, we were, as a journalist, I'm not just interested in glaciers from the scientific perspective or what climate science is telling us. It's also important for us that, because I belong to Kashmir, I've grown up in the hills. So I know for us, mountains is also a part of our culture, our heritage. We actually connect with mountains and glaciers at a very different level. So a lot of interaction with Kanchanji was around that. And some beautiful things he told me, and I really want to put that out, because I personally believe that if we want to work on the glaciers, if we want to work on the mountains, science alone will not help us save glaciers. That doesn't mean science doesn't matter. Science matters, but the stories of local culture and heritage are very, very, very important. So what he told us was that, when he was a young boy, if you go to that region, they believe Mount Everest is, of course, known as Sagar Matha. And the belief there is, on top of Sagar Matha, there is a goddess. Her name is Chomulungma. And people believe that's where the goddess lives. So it's a very, very sacred place for him. We met him at his home in Namche Bazaar. And if you are at Namche Bazaar, you are actually surrounded by so many peaks. Anurag, you know that region so well, but I'm still explaining it because there are a lot of people who possibly don't know what Everest region looks like. So it's surrounded by peaks. And what he told us is that every day as a practice, we wake up and we pray to all the peaks, because these peaks are sister peaks. These are goddesses for us. And he said that as a child, my father had told me to actually never make Chomulungma angry. And, I asked him a question that 1953, it was that expedition which changed the Everest region. And after that time, people have started coming in. Now you have actually traffic jams, as we say, on the Everest peak. What he said, that the goddess is now very angry. So I purposely want to point that out because we also have to understand that region, glaciers and mountains from how people perceive it. They believe that their goddess now is very angry, and he also said that the goddess now needs rest. Uh, I think because we're talking of glaciers and how people, local communities connect with them when they recede, what happens to those people? It's also actually loss of not just water and loss of food security or loss of livelihoods, it's also loss of culture and heritage. And I think that's extremely important, especially for this part of the world, because for us, nature, we were originally all nature worshippers. We still worship nature. Our gods and goddesses live on mountains, where it is Mount Kailash, our rivers, we pray to them. So it's important now to understand how the change of culture in that region is also affecting the mountains and the glaciers in that region. Now, we all know Khumbu region. I mean, this is all what I've picked up. I am no expert on Sherpa culture or the Khumbu region, but this is absolutely what I've picked up as part of my ground reports from there. That region, as we all know, it belongs to the Sherpas, are the indigenous community. It's believed some 400 years back. They moved from Tibet, they settled there. There are about 6,000, I guess, Sherpa population there, some 20 villages. A lot of work before this whole thing, before Everest became like a tourist spot or like a climbing spot, their original work was mainly trade. A beautiful thing what local people told me was that what we see as recreational climbing right now was never a part of the Sherpa culture, because they believe that these peaks are their mothers. And what Kanchanji told us was that, even when we used to set our foot on the peaks, we would actually seek her forgiveness. Because for us, you can't really put your foot on your mother. So that is the kind of culture they originally have come from. Now that whole culture has actually has changed a lot. And that's what people believe that is leading to that change in culture is actually leading to degradation of that entire region. If you look at again Khumbu region, this is from all the pictures are from that area only. It's a highly ecologically fragile region. It's a highly, I've just put out, it has so many high peaks. There are so many rivers that originate from there. Dudh Koshi is one of the important rivers. Why it's important for us in India? Because Dudh Koshi gets met by 7 more tributaries meet it. It becomes Sapt Koshi. That Sapt Koshi enters Nepal, which is our Kosi river from Nepal. It enters Bihar, which is our Kosi river of Bihar. There are so many glaciers there. Your Everest base camp is actually located on Khumbu Glacier, which is glacier at the highest elevation. It's supposed to be some 15 or 17 kilometers long in length. Now, that entire Khumbu region also, it's ecologically fragile. So it's also Sagarmatha National Park. That entire region is a national park. It's also a UNESCO biosphere reserve because, again, it's a biodiversity hotspot. The beautiful thing is that I'm just trying to move I'm not able to, So the beauty of that region is also it's actually managed by the local village development committees. In India, usually what happens is if you have biodiversity area or you have national parks, these are basically managed by forest department. But the interesting thing there in Sagarmatha National Park is that there are like 3 village development committees which are actually managing that whole biosphere. And I must admit, they're actually doing a great job considering the influx of people in that region. That area actually recognizes the rights of local Sherpa community. In India, a lot of times indigenous people are still viewed as somebody as encroachers, and who have to be removed from forest or from biodiversity hotspots to protect it. But it is absolutely completely, different. These are some of the things, I just wanted to show you that how beautiful this entire region is, the kind of Look at the Khumbu Glacier. I mean, it's so beautiful. What you see, those yellow small dots on top, those are actually the tents that have been put up. That's the Everest Base Camp. That's Dudhkoshi River. Beautiful rhododendron branch forest. I haven't seen a more beautiful forest than that. Yaks. I'm going to come back to yaks in a while when we speak about communities and livelihoods. Yaks are the lifeline of that region, and not just for transportation purpose, but their entire trade is around, whether it is milk, whether it is cheese, everything is around yaks. So if yaks are not there, that entire region's economy collapses. Now, what's happening over a period of time since 1953 to now? Again, I'm speaking from what I picked up after speaking to local people, how they see these things. Now, till about 1950, Nepal was close to outsiders. It's only after the fall of the Rana regime that it's actually opened up to the outside world. 1953, we know Mount Everest got conquered. But over a period of time, the number of trekkers, tourists, and mountaineers in that region has increased a lot. There is a reason I'm saying all this is because sometimes we think climate change and impact on mountains, and impact on glaciers is some climate science happening somewhere far away, and which is impacting. But that's of course impacting. But there are also a lot of other local issues which one must address, because these are the issues which community feels very, very strongly about. They may not understand what's happening, in faraway areas, which is affecting their region, but they can see the changes that are happening in that region. Now, two, three things which people told. One is that there is a declining snowfall in that region. We also met some glaciologists when we were on our way to Everest Base Camp, and those glaciologists have been coming every year to that region, monitoring, the accumulation of snow in that area, especially the Mira Glacier, and they clearly said that the snow fall is decreasing, which is affecting the snow in Mira Glacier. There is also people said that the rainfall patterns have changed crazy. And earlier they would have rainfall, and which is, I think, true for a lot of regions in India and other places also. The incidences of thunderstorms have increased a lot in that region, is what people said. And of course, we all know glaciers, of course, in that region are also melting very fast, which is why people believe that their goddess is angry. And this is actually what, I met a lot of guides also in that area, and what they actually said, although it's a part of their livelihood, they earn money out of that, and they said actually, maybe for a year or so you should just let her rest, because she needs to. This is the kind of thing from a region which was really unexplored, which is full of tallest peaks in the world, which has so many glaciers, which has so many rivers originating. This is the kind of thing that we are experiencing now. You see that graph which is down there. I've used it in one of my stories for Mungave, India. You see the rise of lodges and the number of tourists that are coming to that region. And this, I'm not talking of Summit EBC. I'm saying to Sagarmatha, National Park area, the number of tourists that are coming in, they're like really, really increased in that region. Now, what's happening? Of course, like I said, that Khumbu Glacier, on which Everest Base Camp is located, is actually thinning and sinking. This is what the people told us. And there is already a lot of discussions happening in that area of relocating Everest Base Camp, maybe bringing it some 200 or 400 meters down, because they're realizing it's becoming unstable to have an Everest Base Camp over there. I'm not going into details of studies which are telling the amount of ice melt that has happened. You guys can read it. It's directly linked to Gloff events. The Glacier Lake outburst floods, which I'm sure all of us are aware of. There is an increase of Gloff, which has actually increased the fear factor. People are actually living in fear now. So, which is why they believe their goddess is angry. There's a fear of God. We all say that, okay, don't do anything wrong because God will get angry, God will punish you or something like that. So now they feel that their goddess is angry, which is why you have all these things happening. Like I said, winter snowfall has reduced. Very, very interesting, and a very what should I say, dangerous thing which we were told. Namchi Bazaar never had mosquitoes. When we met villagers at Namchi Bazaar, they are saying we are having mosquitoes. Now, see, the problem then is not just of mosquitoes. The problem then also gets linked to health services. You're talking of a region which is so remote. And if local people start getting vector-borne diseases over there, right, then the providing them health facilities becomes so expensive. So it's not just, having mosquitoes there. It's also linked to the larger issues. Now, we met Lama Kazi, he's the president of Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee. And imagine, he said that in just 70 days of season, they collect 30,000 kilograms of waste from Mount Everest, which is their goddess. Yeah, so they're actually collecting waste from their goddess. I mean, that's what it has come down to. And there's some other thing that the kind of waste generation that has actually increased in Sagarmatha National Park. They, of course, don't have waste processing facilities. Biodegradable waste can still go into the local fields and people use it for farming purposes. But otherwise, all of it needs to be brought down and sent for processing, and of course there are no wastewater and sewage treatment plants and all that. Now, this is one story I did from there. When all these changes happen in that altitude in the world, it's actually, a lot of people said that it's affecting the breeding cycle and breeding season of yaks. Initially, when a couple of villagers told this, I did not take it too seriously, because I thought, nowadays everybody links everything with, climate change. Anything happens, we say, because of climate change, this is happening. So people there actually said that we believe that because of this, climate change and all, it's actually affecting the breeding season of yaks. Then we actually went to a yak center and Singboche, and we met people over there. And it's actually, they said, we have recorded the shifting of the breeding season. Now, yaks are seasonal breeders. When you have rising temperatures, when you have erratic rainfall, which affects the health of the pasture lands, when you have invasive species getting into the pasture lands, it's actually affecting the fodder and the grasses for yaks, which is actually affecting the health of the yaks. And yak breeding depends a lot on their body mass and the health. So that's the thing which is happening. And like I had said, the entire economy of that region depends on yaks. And if yaks get affected, it's going to affect the entire region's population. Now, this is not just limited to Everest region. I came back and I then spoke with people in Arunachal Pradesh, in Jammu and Kashmir, and they said the same thing, that yak's breeding season is changing, yak population is declining. Our official census of livestock tells us that 25% of yak population has declined in India. So you can imagine the impact. Now, the thing is, because it affects mostly nomadic communities who live at a higher elevation, we really don't care about it, because it's somewhere far away and it doesn't really bother us. But this is the reality of what's happening, which is why you actually need a regional approach, which Anamika was also talking about. She was speaking about from river's perspective. But even otherwise, whether you have to look at livelihoods and anything, you have to look at the Himalayan region as an entire region. You cannot look at it from geographical boundaries that, okay, this is India, that is Nepal, this is China, like that. You can't do that, because a lot of these things, are interrelated. Similar with gloves. I've been speaking to some people. Like I said, when you have snowfall is declining in that region, glaciers are receding, the direct impact is on gloves. And again, gloves also don't understand geographical boundaries. Clear example of this Yong landslide dam outburst flood, which happened in year 2000. It actually happened in the autonomous region of Tibet. And I mean, it's just crazy. Within 8 minutes, the amount of debris, can you just read this? Some 300 million cubic meters of debris got dumped on the river, which actually created a very long dam on Ibong River, and that breached. And it actually killed people in Arunachal Pradesh. Some 30 people got killed in Arunachal Pradesh. This is happening in Tibet Autonomous Region, and it's killing people in Arunachal Pradesh. Again, what Anamika was saying, we don't have much of transboundary sharing of data and sharing of information. And I think we all need to remember that we all live downstream. Somewhere we all live downstream of somebody. So everyone has to work together. Similar thing with South Lona Clough. This is Sikkim, which happened in October 2023. Terrible Clough event. The impact was actually felt in Bangladesh. This is again recorded, scientifically recorded. I'm not cooking this up. IIT Bhubaneswar has done a study on this, which said that the clough actually traveled, the flood traveled 385 kilometers, and it affected, Bangladesh. Again, growing concern of lack of winter snowfall in the Himalayan region. I really want to flag it. This is a big, big concern. We keep getting concerned about monsoon rainfall changing. This year, there is a forecast of below normal monsoon thing. Everybody is reporting, everybody is writing about it, but we forget. We talk about snowfall only during, December, January month, and then we forget about it. We don't realize the snow that we get in those winter months actually sustains communities throughout the year. And all of these glaciers, I've put them there, they're all receding like anything. And of course, which means cryosphere is under stress, which means we're going to have more Clough events. And of course, for this, both governments and communities in the entire Himalayan region actually need to work together to address this whole issue. I think that's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. Thank you. What a, I don't know, like so many testimonies and reflections, that you have shared of what we are seeing happening in the communities. The science has been telling, but these stories really touches, and so it brings the larger question of climate justice, cryosphere justice, uh, for the people living downstream, but also upstream. So without any further ado, I would just open this floor for questions, for any, questions you may have as audience. You can also write down in the comments, or you can also unmute yourself and ask your questions. We have today, fortunately, good time, 30 minutes for Q&A. So let's take advantage of this. And then I have also a couple of questions that I will ask later on. So any questions, anyone? Hi, Brian. Good to see you.
Hello, everybody. So wonderful to join you from Ohio this morning for me. It really, thank you for sharing. These are wonderful testimonies, and thank you for all you're doing, Anurag. It's been great to meet you. And so I'm just collecting stories of vulnerabilities, of risks, and I'm assessing this, and I'm thinking to myself, what about the people's opportunity spaces that are opening up? I know that we often frame this as vulnerability, but I know that from my own personal experience, there's incredible resilience in mountain communities and adaptive capacity. And I'm just curious if you might reflect a little bit on that. And I'm sorry if I missed some of that from the earlier part of the meeting. I was still through the morning routine getting the family ready for school. So thank you.
No, thank you, Brian. Also, just to introduce Brian, he's a professor of geography at the University of Ohio and teaches glaciology and then supervises so many PhD scholars, which I had a fortune to meet him earlier this February. Thanks, Brian. Who is taking up?
Should I just respond? I'm not.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
So I'm no expert on this, but I completely agree with Brian that it's also opening up a lot of opportunities. I think, we all know what's happening with acres of ice in Ladakh. They're actually using sensors, building data to actually build these ice stupas. Ice stupas were built even traditionally in that region to store, ice and then use it for farming activities during spring season. But what they have done is now they have automated these ice stupas, by putting sensors, by putting valves. So I think what the opportunity that it opens up is that you have some knowledge which people already have living in that area. How can you bring some kind of science and tech, bring it together to solve a lot of these problems? EC Mode, I know, is working with a lot of people to develop early warning systems in that region. And they're involving local communities and also understanding from local communities what are their signs of changes and how do they respond? What would they do in a situation? So I think absolutely there are a lot of opportunities. Also in India, I meet a lot of people working in that region, like Sikkim, where I met PD Rai, who's a former parliamentarian from there. And he said that, with us, the problem is we don't have any glaciologists. I want to spend money. I want to get glacial studies done. But my problem is that most of the glaciologists are in Bangalore. So I think there are a lot of these opportunities. It's just how do we bring all these together to find some strong local examples which can possibly are also scalable. I'm not sure, Brian, if I answered your question, but that's how I see it as a journalist.
Thank you. That's great. And I'm intrigued at the possibilities in that space because I think we all feel this sense of connectedness, but also disconnectedness at the same time. And technology does that, right? It's a double-edged sword in many ways. But I appreciate all that you've brought forward to my understanding. And I think, one of the things that we've been trying to manifest in that space is more of this interchange, citizen science, but I think, listening and really responding in a collaborative way with communities is the only way to be sustainable going forward. But so, yeah, thank you.
If I can just add to what Nidhi you mentioned, Brian, thank you for that question. Actually, it's a very important question, what is actually happening or how people are responding or even how our institutions are responding to these challenges at the local level. So if you really ask me, we tried to actually capture within India through a systematic literature review that what kind of adaptation strategies actually exists, at ground level or at different sectors. Interestingly, what we found is that first and the foremost issue that we had, I am speaking it more from the point of conceptual understanding of adaptation, and we found that there is still a lot of lack of understanding even among people who are talking about adaptation in terms of coping versus adaptation. Are they same, So we see that in many literatures, they are actually, it is a very short-term response to that particular calamity, but it is been framed as adaptation. That is one interesting thing we saw. The other thing we saw, yes, a lot of adaptation is happening, but it is happening in mostly agriculture sector, of course, because agriculture is a very important sector for India. But then many other sectors, say, for example, health, for example, water, in these sectors, we didn't really find a lot of evidences which shows that there are a lot of adaptation efforts going on. Then when you look at the kind of adaptation that we are talking about, and as Nidhi rightly mentioned, is that they're very technocratic. Even the adaptation has become so technocratic that the assumption is that if this has worked here, it will also work there, like as if it's a very homogeneous kind of group of people. So if you really ask me, I think although developing countries, and this is a problem in South Asia, that somehow our focus is more even now in mitigating climate change, although we need to focus a lot on adaptation given the kind of challenges we have, but somewhere the understanding of adaptation is still very blurred. Still, it is felt that it's something which is more closely, of course, related to development, but still effort towards that, I feel from financial point also is very limited. So that's a very big challenge that as a researcher also I feel when I'm writing a proposal, it's very difficult to get funded actually to in an adaptation research. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting for that nuanced perspective. Yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you. Any more questions? If you have a question, please ask, introduce yourself. Meanwhile, while people ask question, I have a question, especially you mentioned, Dr. Anamika, that Brahmaputra flows through, multiple countries, starting originating from China, India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, like four different countries, like with different power dynamics, power asymmetries that exist. So in such a case, what does really then meaningful cooperation on, this glacier water look like, and how realistic like it is in the current like geopolitical scenario that we are living in?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
it's $1 million question,
I
actually.
could ask the same question for like honestly the Indus water, but that will again like create open another sort of warmth. So I thought,
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think, if you really ask me, the first and the simple thing that I feel is that countries should talk. Dialogue is the first step. Cooperation will happen. Negotiation will happen. But the problem that I see in case of South Asian countries is that we only talk when there is a need to talk. Like, for example, Ganges Treaty, we know it's going to expire in December 2026, but we only started talking of, not even a year back, that also very fragmented. So I think that's one big thing. And that is something very different in terms of European countries, I think. They keep talking, even formally, informally, there is a channel of communication. Now, why I say that is so important is because if you don't talk, then it leads to trust deficit. You don't trust each other. And when there is a trust deficit, then you anticipate a lot of things that if I do this, the other country would respond in this way. But that's your anticipation because you don't really know how that country actually looks at that step that you are taking. So if you really look at, for example, India-China relationship in terms of cooperation, it's not that there is nothing. We do have a memorandum of understanding. We do have an expert level mechanism in place for countries to actually come together and talk. But they have not really moved beyond that. They have just remained more like in paper. But if you really look at it from an implementation point of view, joint monitoring, joint development of any infrastructure, it hasn't happened. But the idea was that when we established the joint mechanism. Similarly, India, Bangladesh Joint River Commission, it's a very big name. It's a commission. But again, whenever there is any problem, it's so weak that it can't even take a decision on its own. So I think that's where the problem lies. And I don't want to touch upon Indus, but the problem with Indus is not that the treaty was good or bad. I have always argued that you sign a treaty and you can't think that the treaty will be functional for 90 years. It's impossible. With new demands coming in, new challenges coming in, it has to evolve with time. But it didn't happen. And so today we see it's not there anymore. So, to answer your question, I think the first step is that we need to have a space where countries can meet and talk and initiate this conversation so that it's so important now, given these climate uncertainty, that we work together to, manage the crisis or the risk that these uncertainties can bring.
thank you. Thank you. Hi, Isha. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi. Hello, Anamika ma'am. It was a great talk, and thank you, Anurag, for this really such an interesting session. My name is Isha. I'm from Agami, and I was just wondering, ma'am, I was listening to your talk that one of the critical challenges I think that you're you've touched on so much is the lack of political will that is felt so often in so many kinds of ecological problems. I mean, in this case, we're talking about glaciers, but the lack of political will stops us from every kind of intervention, etc. So, I mean, because you've been researching on it, do you think that there is any specific way to kind of reinvigorate this political will? Because from what I can understand, and I understand this may be a naive question, but is there any way to reinvigorate the political will among the people, among the politicians, the administrators, so that they're not just firefighting, or we're not just dealing with it, but actually like having a genuine, sustainable discussion?
Thank you. Thank you, Isha. Very, very interesting question, actually. And as you very rightly mentioned, everything at the end of the day, ends up into political, will. You might, you may keep trying to bring cooperation as an academics or a Nidhi as a journalist, but if there is no window of opportunity, you are just struggling to bring them together. But then sometime you are sitting at home and you haven't done anything, and you hear that they signed a treaty because there was a political, moment for them to do something. So, but one thing that I feel, I mean, you can look up for this, and there's something called Brahmaputra Dialogue, which was initiated in 2013. And we concluded it in actually 2018. And that was unfortunately because of COVID, which started in 2019, and we couldn't have this dialogue anymore. But why I brought this dialogue is because this was the one of its kind where all the 4 riparian countries of Brahmaputra actually met in one platform to discuss about, identify a path to generate political willingness. At times, we also had political representation in our dialogue, but most of the time, we were focusing on track 2 diplomacy, at sometimes track 1.5 diplomacy, which means academicians mostly. And when I'm saying academicians, I'm talking about influential academicians who has very close connect with the government. So why I feel that, and also I would say media is very important here, because, and I would really like to hear from Nidhi too on this, is that, I feel it's also very important that when media puts pressure on the government on asking that, for example, as of now, our MOU with China on sharing data has expired, right? We don't have any MOU now. So what can you and I, or, Nidhi could do is, one is that can we put pressure on the government that why are you not negotiating? Because of no MOU for sharing data can lead to a lot of loss of life downstream. So, I think as an academician, as a scientist, what we need to do is we need to create science to show that the science clearly indicates that better cooperation, meaning better win-win solution for all. So science needs to talk about this very strongly, vocally, and it becomes a responsibility of scientists like us coming to people who work very closely with community. They can bring out these stories where it clearly indicates that, non-cooperation has led to so much of losses and damage. So, in this bits and pieces, I think what is important to do is that we need to build that pressure and make the political, arena accountable, that why is this not moving? Why are we not signing anything? But this has to be a continuous process. This has to be a very, very strong and continuous process. Like I said, from 13 to 18, a dialogue continued. And if you really ask me, what was the outcome of this dialogue? I would simply say we built a lot of trust. That was the major outcome. We could develop the trust that, everybody felt that we can trust each other. And what we are talking here is something that we are not lying to each other. So that's something that, Isha, we can think of actually doing through our work, through our, if we are working in this line, to create that pressure to the political parties or to political people that, can we move beyond what is happening. So that's something that I would say. Yeah. So, yeah, I think Nidhi may also like to add something to this. So I will give it to Nidhi. She also has done a lot of work on.
Thanks, Anamika. As far as this is concerned, see, media perspective, what I'll say is, unfortunately, media is going completely opposite way. Although I am from media, but I have like no qualms in saying there are 2-3 issues. One is that a lot of media people are actually not trained to report on transboundary rivers. Actually, very few journalists understand when you report on transboundary rivers, what are the issues one looks at, how do you get data, who are the people to speak with. Second problem with media right now is happening is the kind of environment that is there in our region. It is nearly impossible for me to speak to officials of other countries in the region. I mean, it's something like if I'm meeting, if I go to Nepal and if I meet official from, say, Pakistan or even from Bangladesh, they refuse to speak to me for obvious reasons. And the point is, I am sure if I want to push that story, the story will not get published because I'm quoting people from. So it's such a complex thing. But I think what we can start with is, are you talking about Brahmaputra dialogues? I think what we also need to do, which is also maybe with the foundation of Anurag, is actually, why don't you also start training media people in reporting on these issues? You might just get a bunch of 15 journalists who are interested in this, but you have to, because even when Indus Treaty was dismissed, there was like some kind of a victory celebrations that, wow, such a good thing has happened, or anything like that. We actually don't realize a lot of repercussions. We don't realize that Indus is also originating in China. It's coming from there. So we are also downstream of something. So to begin with, I would say at least train and sensitize journalists to report on the complexity of these issues. I think if we are able to do that, at least we'll make some headway.
Thank you. Some brilliant points, and we'll get there. But one thing we are planning to do in this Glacier Dialogue series is we want to also convene people from different countries now. To talk about this issue. Right now, most of our speakers have been from India, and but I think the goal would be to also bring in larger Hindu Kush Himalayan region. People, scientists, or communities from the larger region, and then eventually also from other regions like where we can learn from Alps, in Andes, in Rockies, and discuss some of these things. Any more? I think there are a couple of questions on the chat. Let me see if I can read them or. So there is a question from Rakesh Joshi. Uh, we have a lot of understanding of glaciers, though too complex to understand. How do you people think that the glaciologists or the researchers in the field of glaciers can contribute more to the society? That the problems caused by all this glacier change can be addressed more effectively. I've seen how the society and the communities, which should have been at the core of this all research, are being neglected, which I myself feel as belonging from the Himalayas. Any thoughts on this? I mean, and we don't have a glaciologist. Brian is there, but again, not from the region necessarily.
Yeah, I think Brian is well placed to answer this.
Yeah. But I would say from my experiences interacting with various glaciologists, I can see this conversation changing where glaciologists are also thinking about now, a lot more beyond science about how do we impact
Yeah,
people's
I
lives?
agree
How
with
do
you.
we work
Absolutely.
towards saving people's lives? And that conversation is already happening in those science corridors. It's not something is isolated anymore, and more glaciologists, including like some of the renowned senior glaciologists in the country, are participating and proactively encouraging this dialogue among the new age glaciologists. And also, I think one thing that I have seen within the glacier science field is, I, you know, I just wish more glaciologists go on the field rather than just being also remote sensing glaciologists, just being doing it from the satellite data. And I think that also changes the dynamics of how when you start interacting with the community, when you go into the field, that really changes how you start to look at the communities. When you are just sitting inside a room and looking at the satellite data is very different, while you are actually going on the field and trekking and reaching these difficult mountain terrains and interact with the communities throughout that journey. That also brings a huge shift in how you start to look at the science work, look at the models that you glaciologists are working on. So I think I'm not sure if I'm kind of answering this question, but I'm still, yes, ma'am, Dr. Anamika.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree, Anurag, what you are talking about. I just one very practical way of doing this, which we are actually doing, is that collaboration between natural scientists and social scientists. When you work together, it's both way. I mean, it's not that natural scientists needs to learn from social scientists. Even social scientists can learn a lot from natural scientists. So I have myself understood how a model runs because I am working with a lot of natural scientists. And that also helps me to understand how they think, why do they think like this, because there are also restrictions in the way you are trained, the way you think. So many a times I felt that you need a kind of a skill to go to the field, talk to the people, be very comfortable talking to them, which probably we can do coming from social science, but it becomes difficult for a natural scientist. So that is not their comfort zone. So I think this is something which has helped now, because most of the research funders today ask you that you need to have a societal angle to the project. What is the societal relevance of this project? And that actually helps to bring social and natural science together. So my answer to this would be that collaboration, have interdisciplinary collaboration, it really, really helps. And I completely agree with Anurag that actually that Brian is sitting here today also tells you that they have an interest to know about social science, and that I was recommended to be on this dialogue was also someone who is a natural scientist. Am I correct,
Exactly.
Anurag? So
Absolutely.
that,
I mean, my
yeah, that
interactions
shows.
with Ashim has been also like this. He's also all the time thinking of the communities, the amount of work
Yeah,
they're doing as a glaciologist, but also putting communities at the first. So that shift is
yeah,
already happening in the country.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Brian, would you like to add something?
Just a total agreement. I think it's a long work. It can be exasperating to try to learn to speak across some of those boundaries, but it's very enriching, and I think it's really important. I put in the chat a link to our river ethnographies, which has been a product of some of our interdisciplinary work in the Indus. But I want to amplify the point about mixing the media as well. And one experiment we did down in the Andes, that's where I've done a lot of my work, is in the South American Andes, is we had a workshop that convened scientists, graduate students, and journalists, and we were in the field. So it was a great way to bring people together, to do some show and tell, to show them how not only we think, but how we dig snow pits and how we think about landscapes, and then answer questions one on one, and to really just kind of share in that environment together. So that's a wonderful way to do this too. But yeah, sharing stories. I think this is the bottom line. We're all humans. There's nothing like, I mean, the scientific framework it's just a human endeavor at the end of the day. And if it's not relevant and we're not sharing our lives and our stories, then I don't think it has a whole lot of value, ultimately. So this is great. And I think, your platform in this space is really invaluable to do that. So maybe this is something we could continue to leverage and keep the conversation going. But anyway, yeah, just to say thumbs up.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Brian. We'll also look into it, like what we can do together, and also as foundation, what other efforts that we can take in that direction to uh, there is another question from Chandan on the gloves part. Chandan, I'm not sure if you missed the last glove session. Glacier Dialogue 3 was really heavy focused on the community-based resilience around glove adaptation frameworks. I'll also share the insights with you. Or if you have already signed up in advance, you would have received the dialogues, insights, and then we'll also be uploading the YouTube video of the entire session soon, so that you can also watch that. It covers a lot of these questions that you are asking about gloves and adaptation and resilience for the communities. Any more questions?
Sir,
Otherwise,
can you hear me?
yes. Hello.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, Chandan.
Sir, I was there. I was there in the previous dialogue.
Great. Then you still have the
Okay,
same
okay.
question.
And my question is that what are the major difficulties we have to face just raise the adaptation or resilience capacity? Because this is the most vital part that I think, because in every basin there is a unique story. So uh,
Hmm.
what are the major difficulties that we have to face when we are going to build resilience or adaptation capacity to the mountain communities, for the mountain communities?
Do you want me to respond, Anurag?
Yes, please.
Hi, Chandan. The first thing is, Chandan, when you talk about adaptation and resilience, it's very difficult to have a blueprint for it because adaptation is so context specific, right? Because it depends where that community is, what are you adapting to, what is the risk that is making you adapt to that situation. So one of the most important thing is to remember is that adaptation can never be a top down sort of a thing. It is very, very context specific. However, I always say, I mean, there can be a lot of discussions and debate around this, but I always feel that adaptation is not very different than your development indicators as well. And, if you really look at why do we always say that marginalized community who do not have access to resources are more vulnerable than the other side, and that is also because this is where I feel that how you develop as a economy, as a country also matters. If you are in a country where development is very unequal, then you would actually need more specific policies for certain group of people. Coming to the mountain community, I think like although Assam is not really in the mountain side, but still coming from a little bit far away from the central India, one of the things that we feel always it makes us very difficult. Like I just sent a message to Anurag that it is raining heavily here and I might lose connectivity. So I think one thing it's so important is know that even when there are you know snowfall, there are a thunderstorm, if we can keep the connectivity intact, that's not doesn't require a lot, but that's I think is so horrible. And coming from this area, I can tell you it's really horrible when your mobile is not working, you can't reach out to your near and dear one. And I think one thing that I feel that mountain community do need a better connectivity. But when I'm saying better connectivity, it doesn't mean that you need a 4-lane road. It means that you need something which will allow somebody to go and rescue you without losing time. There is a way to reach out to you. If you remember in Sikkim, when the earthquake happened, it took ages for us to reach to the North Sikkim. I think these are one of the major things I feel in the mountain community it's needed, number one. And number two is overall, development in the sense you have better access to school, better good health. All of these are also very strong indicator of your capacity to adapt, to be resilient to climate change. So there are many, many points. I know we are running out of time, but this is just briefly about, we can always talk later, Chandan, if you have further question. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Anurag sir.
Thank you, Chandan, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Anamika, Nidhi. Thank you, Brian, for engaging, and thank you to everyone who participated today and brought your questions and remarks and listening. Really looking forward. We want to continue shaping this dialogue. We have been covering variety of topics, and we'll want to see the next set of dialogues will how will move to other areas that we have not touched yet. Um, so we'll still working on figuring out the next dialogue theme and the set of speakers. But if you have recommendations, please send our way. And if you would like someone to come and speak, we can also reach out to them. Yeah, with that, just you can read all the insights on our website, on our blog, also on Substack, and then we are also working towards uploading all the these dialogue conversations on your YouTube channel so that you can watch it later on. So thank you once again, and let us know if you have any more questions. Okay, and then we'll reach out to the speakers for any specific queries you may have.
Okay, thank you. Nice to meet
Thank
you all.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye bye.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.